Chapter 11 of The Pirate's Own Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barry Eads. The Pirate's Own Book by Charles Elms. Chapter 11. The bloody career and execution of Vincent Benavides, a pirate on the west coast of South America. Vincent Benavides was the son of the Gallier of Quirihue in the district of Conception. He was a man of ferocious manners, and had been guilty of several murders. Upon the breaking out of the Revolutionary War, he entered the Patriot army as a private soldier, and was a sergeant of grenadiers at the time of the first Chilean Revolution. He, however, deserted to the Spaniards, and was taken prisoner in their service, when they sustained on the plains of Maypo on the 5th of April 1818 that defeat which decided their fortunes in that part of America and secured the independence of Chile. Benavides, his brother, and some other traitors to the Chilean cause were sentenced to death and brought forth in the plaza, or public square of Santiago, in order to be shot. Benavides, though terribly wounded by the discharge, was not killed, but he had the presence of mind to counterfeit death in so perfect a manner that the imposture was not suspected. The bodies of the traitors were not buried, but dragged away to a distance, and there left to be devoured by the gallinazos, or vultures. The sergeant who had the superintendence of this part of the ceremony had a personal hatred to Benavides, on account of that person having murdered some of his relations, and to gratify his revenge he drew his sword and gave the dead body, as he thought, a severe gash in the side as they were dragging it along. The resolute Benavides had the fortitude to bear this also, without flinching or even showing the least indication of life, and one cannot help regretting that so determined a power of endurance had not been turned to a better purpose. Benavides lay like a dead man in the heap of carcasses until it became dark, and then, pierced with shot and gashed by the sword as he was, he crawled to a neighbouring cottage, the inhabitants of which received him with the greatest kindness and attended him with the greatest care. The daring ruffian, who knew the value of his own talents and courage, being aware that General San Martin was planning the expedition to Peru, a service in which there would be much of desperation and danger, sent word to the general that he was alive, and invited him to a secret conference at midnight, in the same plaza in which it was believed Benavides had been shot. The signal agreed upon was, that they should strike fire 3 times with their flints, as that was not likely to be answered by any but the proper party, and yet was not calculated to awaken suspicion. San Martin, alone, and provided with a brace of pistols, met the desperado, and after a long conference it was agreed that Benavides should, in the meantime, go out against the Arakan Indians, but that he should hold himself in readiness to proceed to Peru, when the expedition suited. Having procured the requisite passports, he proceeded to Chile, where, having again diverted the Chileans, he succeeded in persuading the commander of the Spanish troops that he had force sufficient to carry on the war against Chile, and the commander in consequence retired to Valdivia, and left Benavides commander of the whole frontier on the Biobio. Having thus cleared the coast of the Spanish commander, he went over to the Arakans, or rather he formed a band of armed robbers who committed every cruelty, and were guilty of every perfidy in the south of Chile. Wherever Benavides came, his footsteps were marked with blood, and the old men, the women, and the children were butchered, lest they should give notice of his motions. When he had rendered himself formidable by land, he resolved to be equally powerful upon the sea. He equipped a corsair with instructions to capture the vessels of all nations, and as Arucan is directly opposite the island of Santa Maria, where vessels put in for refreshment after having doubled Cape Horn, his situation was well adapted for his purpose. He was but too successful. The first of his prizes was the American ship Hero, which he took by surprise in the night. The second was the Herculia, a brig belonging to the same country. While the unconscious crew were proceeding, as usual, to catch seals on this island, lying about 3 leagues from the mainland of Aruca, an armed body of men rushed from the woods, and overpowering them, tied their hands behind them, and left them under a guard on the beach. These were no other than the pirates, who now took the Herculia's own boats, and going on board surprised the captain and 4 of his crew, who had remained to take care of the brig, and having brought off the prisoners from the beach, threw them all into the hold, closing the hatches over them. They then tripped the vessel's anchor, and sailing over in triumph to Aruca, were received by Benavides, with a salute of musketry fired under the Spanish flag, which it was their chief's pleasure to hoist on that day. In the course of the next night, Benavides ordered the captain and his crew to be removed to a house on shore, at some distance from the town, then taking them out, one by one, he stripped and pillaged them of all they possessed, threatening them the whole time with drawn swords and loaded muskets. Next morning he paid the prisoners a visit and ordered them to the capital, called together the principal people of the town, and desired each to select one as a servant. The captain and 4 others not happening to please the fancy of anyone, Benavides, after saying he would himself take charge of the captain, gave directions, on pain of instant death, that some one should hold themselves responsible for the other prisoners. Some days after this they were called together, and required to serve as soldiers in the pirates' army, an order to which they consented, knowing well by what they had already seen that the consequence of refusal would be fatal. Benavides, though unquestionably a ferocious savage, was, nevertheless, a man of resource, full of activity and of considerable energy of character. He converted the whale spears and harpoons into lances for his cavalry and halberts for his sergeants, and out of the sails he made trousers for half of his army. The carpenters he set to work making baggage carts and repairing his boats. The armourers he kept perpetually at work, mending muskets and making pikes, managing in this way to turn the skill of every one of his prisoners to some useful account. He treated the officers too not unkindly, allowed them to live in his house, and was very anxious on all occasions to have their advice respecting the equipment of his troops. Upon one occasion, when walking with the captain of the Herculia, he remarked that his army was now almost complete in every respect, except in one essential particular, and it cut him, he said, to the soul, to think of such a deficiency. He had no trumpets for his cavalry, and added that it was utterly impossible to make the fellows believe themselves dragoons, unless they heard a blast in their ears at every turn, and neither men nor horses would ever do their duty properly, if not roused to it by the sound of a trumpet. In short, he declared, some device must be hit upon to supply this equipment. The captain, willing to ingratiate himself with the pirate, after a little reflection, suggested to him that trumpets might easily be made of copper sheets on the bottoms of the vessels he had taken. "Very true," cried the delighted chief. "How came I not to think of that before?" Instantly all hands were employed in ripping off the copper, and the armourers being set to work under his personal superintendence, the whole camp, before night, resounded with the warlike blasts of the cavalry. The captain of the ship, who had given him the brilliant idea of the copper trumpets, had by these means so far won upon his good will and confidence as to be allowed a considerable range to walk on. He of course was always looking out for some plan of escape, and at length an opportunity occurring, he, with the mate of the Ocean and 9 of his crew, seized 2 whaleboats, imprudently left on the banks of the river, and rowed off. Before quitting the shore, they took the precaution of staving all the other boats, to prevent pursuit, and accordingly, though their escape was immediately discovered, they succeeded in getting so much the start of the people whom Benavides sent in pursuit of them, that they reached St. Mary's Island in safety. Here they caught several seals, upon which they subsisted very miserably till they reached Valparaiso. It was in consequence of their report of Benavides' proceedings, made to Sir Thomas Hardy, the commander-in-chief, that he deemed it proper to send a ship to rescue, if possible, the remaining unfortunate captives at Aruca. Benavides having manned the Herculia, it suited the mate, the captain and crew being detained as hostages, to sail with the brig to Chile, and seek aid from the Spanish governor. The Herculia returned with a 24-pounder, 2 field pieces, 11 Spanish officers, and 20 soldiers, together with the most flattering letters and congratulations to the worthy ally of his most Catholic Majesty. Soon after this he captured the Perseverance, English whaler, and the American brig Ocean, bound for Lima, with several thousand stand of arms on board. The captain of the Herculia, with the mate of the Ocean, and several men, after suffering great hardships,